Well, it looks like President Trump has changed his mind and in a pretty shocking turn of events has decided that the United States will continue providing military aid to Ukraine. So today we're going to talk about what we know so far, what may have prompted this change, and then the Russian reaction to this news. Now, starting out, this really came out yesterday during an NBC News interview with President Trump, where he said, we're going to start selling more weapons to NATO, and big news around Russia and Ukraine coming Monday. Let's give that a listen.
The president said he's disappointed in Russia and told us he thinks he'll have a major statement to make about Russia on Monday. Though when pressed, he did not say what that statement will be. The president also said he just made a deal today with NATO in which he says the U.S. will send weapons to Ukraine through NATO, and NATO is, quote, paying for those weapons 100%, including the Patriot air defenses that Ukraine has been asking for, and that NATO will distribute them.
Now, we've talked about this possibility before. This seems like it was right up Trump's alley, right? Sell more weapons, more money for the United States, more jobs for U.S. citizens, more investment coming into the U.S. And we can sell things like Patriot interceptors, ramp up production, stand up new factories, sell those to our allies in Europe that can use them, or they can choose to donate, give, or sell those to Ukraine. It's a win-win-win-win-win all around. I don't know how many wins we need to have there. And then on the back end, you can show that U.S. technology is effective in countering Russian ballistic and cruise missiles, right? Great, positive all around. And it does kind of look like that's the direction President Trump is taking this in. Now, there's a couple other options here as well that may have pushed the president over the line to go from, let's just stop the freeze to no, there's additional and new aid coming. One of them, tragically, happened just a couple days ago and made the front page of the New York Post today, which is known to be a publication that the president does look at from time to time, where they documented this case where a 1-year-old child in Kherson, a Ukrainian child, was, for lack of a better term, executed in a Russian drone attack. And you can see the front page of this major publication here in the United States. This is part of what's been known as the human safari in Kherson. We've talked about that in a couple of videos on this channel, and I'm working to get somebody that just put together a big documentary on to talk about this as well. I'll link some of their work in the description below, but this has been just sick. The Russians have been hunting Ukrainians in Kherson, and the reason this specific instance stands out is, yes, look, civilian casualties in war are tragic. They happen, they're tragic. Children dying in war. Unfortunately, it happens, but it is tragic. In this particular case, the FPV-style drone, those are the first-person view drones. I'm going to play some footage here on the screen to give you an idea of what that looks like. Drone pilots on both sides have become very, very effective. They're incredibly good at their work in terms of being able to fly these FPV drones into open hatches of vehicles, hit moving targets, hit people on motorcycles as they're swerving to try to avoid getting hit. We've seen countless examples, actually, of Russian and Ukrainian operators going in to strike what is just a vehicle, and as they approach, you see civilians jump out and they veer off, and they decide that's not a valid target. We're not going to hit it. So in this case, with a 1-year-old child playing in the playpen, that means the FPV drone operator was watching that child, identified the target, went in, knew what they were targeting, and killed that 1-year-old. According to the grandparents that were working there, they said he was just there playing in the playpen when the drone detonated. Shrapnel pierced his heart and killed him almost immediately. The child named Dmitryk, who just celebrated his first birthday 2 months ago. The Andrei Yermak, the kind of President Zelensky's key advisor, said, quote, "This was not an accident. This was a manhunt. The operator watched a child playing through his drone camera, and he attacked in cold blood. This is just one case among hundreds. For Russians, killing civilians in Ukraine has become sport. The frequency of the drone attacks in Kherson has led civilians to describe their home as a human safari zone, where they're hunted from the sky by deadly Russian devices." Again, if you want more information on that, and it's awful and disgusting, it is genuinely the hunting of civilians, I'll link some videos and resources in the description below to dig into that a little bit further. Now, it may have been that could have been something that pushed President Trump over the line. It also could have been the rapid increase in Russian drone and missile attacks against Ukraine. And we've talked about this for a couple weeks now. Every other day, there's a new record set. More drones, 741 drones and missiles fired into Ukraine in one night just a few nights ago. And 2 days ago, President Zelensky put out a statement. Kyiv came under massive bombardment, where he said, quote, "This night, Russia launched a massive combined strike that lasted almost 10 hours 18 missiles, including ballistic missiles, and around 400 strike drones, of which almost 200 were Shaheeds. This is an obvious escalation of terror by Russia. Hundreds of Shaheeds every night, constant strikes, massive attacks against Ukrainian cities. This means that acceleration is needed. We need to be faster with sanctions and put pressure on Russia so it feels the consequences of its terror. Today, I talk with partners, in particular the Coalition of the Willing, about additional funding for the production of interceptor drones and the supply of air defense for Ukraine. The tasks are absolutely clear. Such Russian strikes must be responded to harshly. This is exactly how we will respond. Now, we have seen, since President Trump took office, a drastic increase in Russian drone and missile strikes against Ukraine. And there's a couple of different ways that you could potentially read into that. One is that Putin believed that Trump was going to be pushing for some sort of negotiated settlement, so he was trying to get the upper hand at the negotiating table. Another more pessimistic view is, unfortunately, that we've seen play out now for a couple months, is that Putin thought there'd be no repercussions from the West and the United States if they ramped up attacks on Ukrainian cities. That has generally been how this has gone, unfortunately. Now, I would say that one way to show American strength and dominance in the military and technology field is to provide resources to Ukraine to say, hey, Russia, look, we're able to protect Ukraine halfway around the world without even deploying any of our men and women in uniform. We just sent over some more equipment, helped them stand up more of these drone interceptor production facilities, maybe in Ukraine, maybe in Poland, maybe just providing some of the necessary equipment, like the rockets with certain fuses that are used to shoot down the Shaheeds. There's a good way for the United States to come out of this looking stronger than ever, and hopefully that's the path President Trump is on right now. Now, we did kind of see this coming for a period of time. It was not an overnight switch. It's been trending in this direction since the news came out about 10 days ago that someone mysteriously, and more on this in a second, just happened to freeze Ukraine aid out of the Pentagon. Because a couple days ago, President Trump was pushed on some of this during a press briefing, and he came right out and said, like, hey, look, Putin's kind of been stringing us along. And it made it seem like maybe President Trump has seen the light here and that Putin does not want peace. And there are no indications, even from Russians, that Putin is trying to negotiate some sort of settlement here. He wants all of Ukraine. But nonetheless, let's give that a listen. President Trump just a couple days ago.
I don't know, we get a lot of bullshit thrown at us by Putin, for you want to know the truth. He's very nice all the time, but it turns out to be meaningless.
Do you want to sanction him? Lindsey Graham has a sanctions bill on Russia. Do you want him to move
I'm
that
looking
down?
at it, yeah, no, I'm looking. The Senate is passing and passed a very, very tough sanctions bill. Yeah, I'm looking at it.
And you sign that?
And there's a lot of different ways you could take this. I think the right way to view this is I wish we would have gotten here sooner, because there's a lot of people, former Vice President Mike Pence included, that I'll play here in a second, that kind of saw this for a long time, not just for the last 6 months, but for years and years on end, that Russia's not just looking for somebody to talk to. They probably need to be met with force in order to stop what they're doing in Ukraine. In fact, following all of this news that additional aid is heading to Ukraine, we're starting to see more people pop up on the talk shows, and Vice President Pence, who was the vice president under President Trump in his first administration, talked about this and said what I think is on a lot of our minds, where it's, hey, Putin doesn't want peace, and it's nice to see that we're all on the same page now, and maybe this means positive progress going forward. Here's Vice President Pence.
Starting to recognize that Vladimir Putin doesn't want peace. Vladimir Putin wants Ukraine. And again and again, President Zelensky, who I came to know during my time as vice president, has made it clear he's prepared for a ceasefire. He's prepared to negotiate a lasting peace in the region. While we saw again just last night, a barrage of merciless attacks on civilian populations, and I welcome the president's decision to reverse a decision somewhere out of the Pentagon that suspended aid to Ukraine. You look back at our administration, Kate, and we were the first administration to provide lethal aid to Ukraine. Remember, Barack Obama only provided, military meals and blankets. We came in and gave them the kind of Stinger missiles and resources that I think prevented Vladimir Putin from invading Ukraine during our 4 years.
All right, we got to talk about that just a little bit. So first off, the decision that mysteriously happened somewhere in the Pentagon, I feel pretty confident at this point, just based off of the statements coming from different senior officials, that was Secretary Hegseth. Like, it ended somewhere right around there. The decision was made there. Does not appear, from what I can tell at this point, that he talked to the White House, that he talked to the State Department, that he talked to General Kellogg, the Ukraine envoy, certainly that he talked to Ukraine or even our allies in Europe. That more and more looks like Secretary Hegseth, for the second time in his tenure, made that decision unilaterally. So we'll see if President Trump is interested in getting to the bottom of that. Maybe a different story for a different day, but I think Vice President Pence kind of tiptoes around that one a little bit, not wanting to call anyone out by name. The second part, though, and while I like the general message that the Vice President is going on here, he can't help but get right back into politicking, right? Which is just so frustrating for me to see, no matter which side of the aisle it's coming on, directly into, well, you see, when we were in power or during our administration, Russia wouldn't have dared do this. I don't remember that we were sending Stingers to Ukraine. Definitely javelins, but I don't recall Stingers back in the 2014 to 2022 period. Maybe. I might be mistaken, but nonetheless, it's worth remembering, yes, Putin did not initiate the large-scale invasion, the full invasion that he did in 2022, but there were Ukrainians dying almost every single day from 2014 to 2022. That included Vice President Pence's tenure. So it's not as though there was magically peace during that period. It just didn't get drastically worse like it did in 2022. Nonetheless, something else Vice President Pence hit on here was that President Trump is getting tired of seeing the continued attacks against civilian infrastructure. And there was even more last night, unfortunately. Another one of these instances that's hard to quantify, hard to justify, right? Like, what is the rationale for doing this? Just last night, President Zelensky put out a statement, and we have some pictures and videos to back this up, saying that 9 people were injured in a drone attack in Kharkiv. Among the injured are women in a maternity hospital, women giving birth to their children, women after operations. How much of that do you have to see? You've got the 1-year-old being deliberately targeted, now a maternity hospital being hit. I think it's that kind of stuff that over time piles up to where it's very hard for anybody to look at Russia right now and say that looks like a group that is trying to get to a peaceful negotiation. You know, if it was military target after military target, it's one thing. But as these events pop up and make the news, I mean, we just tragically got news a couple days ago that a group of Ukrainian medics with the 47th Mechanized Brigade traveling in their medical vehicle were targeted and killed by Russians. It's that kind of thing. When you got medical teams being specifically targeted, children being targeted, maternity hospitals being targeted, at some point, no matter how much you want to believe otherwise, you have to say, all right, fine, maybe this is not a country, maybe this is not an individual in Vladimir Putin actually looking for peace. Now, in line with that, Secretary Rubio was talking about the possibility of it sending additional weapons to Ukraine. And the way he kind of phrased it was more about, this is President Trump hating war. He wants to bring about an end to the killing, so maybe add some pressure to Russia to come to the table. But this is what Secretary of State Marco Rubio had to say about that. Let's give it a listen.
The loss of life is something of great interest to the president. It's important to note that since January of this year, as an example, just to give you on the Russian side, they've lost 100,000 soldiers, dead. Not injured, I'm talking about dead. And on the Ukrainian side, the numbers are less, but still very significant. And so that's, the president doesn't like wars. He thinks wars are a waste of money and a waste of lives. And he wants them to end. And he's going to do everything he can within his power to end this war and any other war he has a chance to end, as you've seen in the past. And so we're going to continue to work at it. We understand that these things take time and patience.
So pretty consistent with Secretary Rubio's stance. And for what it's worth, as the Secretary of State, the diplomacy guy, that's kind of what you would expect him to say, right? We're working towards peace. We're trying to find peace and not necessarily talk about the military option in some of these regards. 100,000 dead Russians in the last 6 months. I don't think I would use that in my personal reporting. That does not pass the common sense test based off the footage and the documentation we've seen off the battlefield. That would be 16,000 Russians killed per month so far this year. That seems way too high. In fact, I don't think I've seen Ukraine I haven't seen anybody else use that number for what it's worth other than Secretary Rubio. I'd have to go see what the Ukrainian numbers are, but I'd be shocked if they are claiming 100,000 killed, not killed and wounded, killed in the last 6 months. The reason I say that is there's definitely been fighting ongoing. Ukraine has extended the kill zone. They're striking targets upwards of 40 kilometers back all across the front. So they've expanded when and where they're able to hit Russian targets with drones, and they're constantly hunting 24/7. But we just aren't seeing a lot of the assaults, large-scale assaults. It's mostly squad size and about squad size, 10 to 20 maybe max. And if that entire squad gets wiped out, which does happen from time to time, it's still very hard to get from that to 16,000 killed in the span of a month, considering the majority of the fighting like that is happening in Sumy up north and in Pokrovsk in the south. We're just not seeing, company or battalion-sized assaults where entire organizations are getting mowed down like they were in Bakhmut a couple years ago when the casualty numbers were so high. So I'd be careful to use that 100,000 number with any confidence. Now, another interesting angle that was put forward here by Vice President Pence, going back to some of his statements, was, hey, what we might be seeing right now is that President Trump and his administration has a little bit of confidence, a little more swagger after they hit Iran, and nothing really came of that. And he points at some of the isolationist voices inside of the administration and those close to the administration that have been, I don't want to just say anti-war, because I think that makes it seem like there are people that are pro-war, and I don't think that's a fair assessment. But there's been some saying we have to get away from Ukraine entirely because we can't even afford to risk the possibility that Russia might look at us the wrong way and decide to attack the United States. A lot of that similar argument was being used with Iran. Tucker Carlson, for years now, has been saying any strikes on Iran could lead to World War III and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Americans dead. That's not exactly what happened after U.S. B-2 bombers hit the nuclear facilities a couple weeks ago. So moving to Vice President Vance here, talking about how the isolationist voices may have taken a bit of an L, and that may have empowered Trump to get more involved with Ukraine. Let's give that a listen.
Isolationist voices in and around this administration that recently condemned the president's correct and courageous decision to launch a military assault against Iran. I think they may have lost some of their footing with the president. I mean, by leveling criticism in our effort to ensure that Iran could never obtain a usable nuclear weapon, I think some of those isolationist voices may have literally lost some credibility with the president. But whatever the cause, I welcome it, because I do believe the time has come for us to renew our military support for Ukraine, make it clear that we're going to continue to provide that support along with our European allies until a just and lasting peace is achieved.
All right, so there's definitely a couple different ways to look at why President Trump may have changed his mind. Personally, I don't think it really matters all that much, just that we're here now, and hopefully, this is a big change. Hopefully we don't just continue to send some military aid to Ukraine, but hopefully we've opened up this pathway to maybe sell more equipment into NATO and provide additional aid above what we've done so far, to not just keep Ukraine in the fight, but give them a real opportunity to defend themselves against this Russian attack. So we should hear more information come Monday, but I did want to provide you guys with some updates on the fundraising front. It's humbling to see your generosity in this regard. I just got this video earlier today that I wanted to play for you all from the Ukrainian 73rd Naval Special Operations Center. So these are like Ukraine's Navy SEALs. These dudes are badass. Anyways, a thank you video for providing 3 Mavic drones. Here we go.
Бійці 73-го центру ССО дякують за допомогу у вигляді тепловізійних дронів волонтерам благодійного фонду UAO. Окрема подяка YouTube-каналу Стюарта Престона за проведений збір коштів для нашого підрозділу. Слава Україні! Героям слава!
I also, just a couple days ago, wrapped up an interview with the intel officer for the 73rd. That's going through some OPSEC checks right now with his chain of command, but as soon as that's released, we'll get that up on the channel as well. All of that was done through Ukraine Aid Operations. We'll link that fundraiser in the description if interested. We picked up like $97,000 already, and we'll probably close it out a couple weeks after we air the next interview. Now, turning over to the Russian response so far, you can imagine they're not all that happy. They thought for a while that President Trump might just completely turn his back on Ukraine, which would, significantly decrease, at least in the short term, the number, the quantity of military aid, and that doesn't appear to be happening. So a great one here from Russian media. Let's see. It's called Russia Media Monitor. think it's Julia Davis puts this together. I'll link their channel in the description below. Do some incredible work over on X analyzing this stuff. But it's a clip from their kind of state TV with Solovyov. And this dude just straight up threatening the United States, like talking about nuclear attacks against the United States because of this. It's in Russian. There's subtitles. I'll turn it down and talk through it for anybody just listening. But here we go. I have a simple question. How many percent would Trump believe that we will erase the hell out of America? With what percentage would Trump believe that 2 Poseidon nuclear-powered underwater systems, kind of long-range, massive missiles or torpedoes to the North American continent will cause the formation of a radioactive tsunami that will create a strait named after Comrade Stalin? How well will Comrade Trump understand and believe when he realizes that our submarines of a certain class are armed with weapons that are powerful enough for any protective element that is yet to be built? The Golden Dome, the Diamond Dome, or the Shit Dome, designed to protect America from a retaliatory strike. Does he seriously think that as soon as he sends ballistic missiles or his freaking B-2s that are visible to us and will try to strike our territory, we will just sit here and say, "Oi, look"? No, we'll freaking erase you off the face of the earth. If you think our Supreme Commander-in-Chief was joking when he said, "Who needs the world if Russia isn't in it?" Or do you think it was just a figure of speech? When it was said that a retaliatory strike means that if we're going to heaven, but you will croak. Have you gone nuts? Who do you think you are? No, really, Americans, who do you think you are? Come back to your senses, you animals. So, overall, crashing out a little bit, I'd say. This is an interesting move because it's U.S. military aid to Ukraine. Now, Trump in a leaked phone call a few days ago talked about how he threatened Putin about bombing Moscow if they did anything stupid with Ukraine, and said he threatened the same to China. There's been nothing public after that at all. So we're talking about aid going to Ukraine that's been going to Ukraine for a long time, and we're getting this crash out of, yeah, cool, maybe we'll just erase North America, the United States, off the face of the earth. With a Poseidon missile, by the way, that I don't think actually exists quite yet. Everything from that program that was supposed to be a part of Poseidon was going to be in this new kind of iteration of Russian weaponry. I don't think any of it actually functions quite yet. But nonetheless, that's the nice threat from Russian state media. Turning over to something not quite as propagandistic. I don't know. There's got to be a way to say that. TASS Media, another Russian outlet here. They say Trump's harsher tone remains largely symbolic for now as he seeks to avoid being portrayed as weak. This stance likely does not imply a sharp increase in arms deliveries. Quoting a Russian expert here, they said, quote, he would prefer this to remain Biden's war rather than becoming Trump's war. I think there's something to that. At this point, everything that is going to Ukraine is just a holdover from the Biden administration, and that's going to continue for some time. The minute Trump adds something to that, he can no longer say, this isn't my war, which, he just said it like yesterday, right? Every time he gets the opportunity. Vice President Pence just tried to say it as well, saying, well, we did the right thing. This all started under President Biden. So the minute that Trump starts adding to, that becomes harder to say, this is not my war, this is Biden's war. TASS says, quote, there are several reasons why a shift towards harsher confrontation may occur. These include sending a signal of strength to the domestic audience, acknowledging the complexity of the conflict itself, and the growing influence of hardliners within the administration. Look, that kind of lines up with some of the clips we played earlier. The isolationists maybe not having the same pull that they did just a couple weeks ago before the Iran strike. The complexity of the issue, no doubt. There's been no indications that Putin is walking back and maybe considering any sort of peace. So who knows? TASS actually might have kind of hit the nail on the head here in a couple different ways. But nonetheless, I always think it's interesting to see not just what the U.S. and Ukraine and our allies are saying, but also, in this case, the adversarial Russia, how they're taking the news of additional arms shipments to Ukraine. But the big news will probably be on Monday when President Trump announces exactly what his big surprise is around this conflict. That's all I got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.